If you want news and rumors that appeal, welcome to the Dusty Wheel. If you want news and rumors.
Hey, welcome back to the Dusty Wheel. I'm your host, the Innkeeper, and this is our live call and talk show all about the Wheel of Time. Now, tonight's going to be a special episode. We're going to discuss Robert Jordan's notes, and we'll actually explain what that even means. I'm sure some of you are asking, where did you get these notes, and what are they? We're going to be discussing what Robert Jordan wrote after the Great Hunt when he was building out the idea for the Dragon Reborn. But before we do that, I want to make a couple of announcements. First of all, today is Watt Wednesday, and there was a little bit of news. I don't know if some of you are watching Watt on Prime. They formally announced a lot of actors that we knew were going to be part of the show. And we have Lolita Chakrabarti as Marin Alvear. Michael, I think it's Tuwain. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that. It's Bran. And then David Stern as Sanbui. We have Christopher Scurriff as Abel Cawthon, and then Juliet Howland as Natty Cawthon, and Mandy Simmons as Days Conquer. So yeah, we finally got those. It was a lot of fun to have that. I think collective excitement went around Twitter of time. For those of you that follow it on Twitter, everyone was excited to finally get those official announcements and plus meet Sanbui. So welcome to all of those actors to Wheel of Time fandom. It's awesome to have you with us. Now, I also want to remind you that this Sunday, we are going to be doing a deep dive episode into parallel, perpendicular, and mirror worlds. It's going to be a lot of fun. If you've ever had questions about the lore around those, theories, speculation, we're just going to dig in and have fun. This is one of my favorite topics, so please be sure and come join us on Sunday. And then the following Wednesday, I think I've told everybody about this, we have a little special Watt Wednesday. It's a watch and find out kind of episode. If you've seen those around here with us, there's going to be a lot of announcements, and there's going to be a lot of giveaways. And I think you're going to want to be there, but that's all we're going to tell you about it. Now, one last note. Yeah, some of you saw this on social media. We have actual official coasters now. The Dusty Wheel Show. No more of those paper ones I've been using before. So that might be one of the giveaways we have for you come next Wednesday, along with some t-shirts and a lot of other fun stuff related to maybe one of the announcements. So that is it. Now let's get to the show. Let me introduce my guest panelists this evening. Welcome to the show, Linda Taglieri and Terez. How are you both doing tonight?
Great, thanks.
Hi. You pronounced Linda's name wrong.
I did?
Oh. Yes.
I always say Taglieri. It's Taglieri.
Don't pronounce the G.
See, this is why I have Terez in the show, because she's going to correct everything that I am wrong about on the Wheel of Time also. I've always said it that. So now by the way, for those of you that are watching, this is Wheel of Time fandom. Pronunciation is a fun thing for us to tease each other about. So there we go. Linda, those of you that don't know Linda, she's from the 13th Depository. I don't know how you have never been to her website if you haven't. Linda is a lore queen. She knows so much about the books, and it's really exciting to have you here, Linda. Welcome back, I should say. This is like your third or fourth episode with us.
It is, I guess, yes. Oh, it's great to be back, and thank you, Matt, for the intro.
Absolutely. And Terez, this is your first episode with us, but Terez is an old friend of ours from Theoryland. She's also the track director for the Wheel of Time track at JordanCon. And for those of you that have ever used the Theoryland database that searches all of the interviews and such, Terez is like responsible for, I don't know, what would you say, 70% of that? I don't know. Terez is responsible for a large portion of it. So it's awesome to have you both here, especially on this topic, Robert Jordan's notes and the Dragon Reborn. Terez, can you maybe, I don't know, succinctly or just summarize, when we say Robert Jordan's notes and the files that we're kind of reviewing tonight and what we're going to discuss, Is there an easy way to kind of explain what this is for fans that are watching that have no idea what we're talking about?
Yeah, sure. They're basically his working notes. So, I mean, they weren't intended to ever be seen by anybody else. They were just notes that he kept to try to keep track, to maybe brainstorm what he was going to do in future books. And the brainstorming files are the most interesting ones. A lot of times the ones that he was using to keep track of stuff are just lots of stuff that we already know. But there are files upon files upon files of just notes about where people are at this time, where they are at this time, what he's going to do in the next book, what he's thinking about doing in the next book. And occasionally some stuff that we never knew while he was working on the books. A lot of that made into the companion and a lot of it didn't. So yeah, there's millions of words in these files, but a lot of it's repetitive because he would copy paste some things from one file to another. And sometimes there would be like long passages from the books copied into the files, stuff like that. But even taking that into consideration, it's still a lot of information.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really like about the notes themselves is he kept variations of the working file. So we can see an idea develop over time. And not all of the ideas, for those that are watching, it's not like these are all the notes that he's ever written and that this he has all of the facts and data here. I like to call these like worlds of if. These are like words of if, right? Like this isn't necessarily canon. It's just, this is the whole, these are foundational kind of things that he wrote when he was thinking about what to do in many cases. Or now there are notes later on where he's well into the books, and he's writing things that do end up there. But still, those that are watching, I don't want you to take this as somehow we're establishing canon with this. The whole fun part about this for us, at least for me, is to go over what he was planning, for example, for the Dragon Reborn, discuss some of these ideas, and talk about what actually made it, what was cut, what was dropped, what made it came in later. So let's do that. Did either of you have anything else to say about the notes themselves before we jump into it? Okay, let's. Oh yeah, and I should remind everybody, there are spoilers here somewhat. For those that are watching, kind of worried about spoilers, this will contain some spoilers as far as facts that show up later, like plots that take place later on that we start talking about. So we're not here to spoil the entire books, but just know that you may have some things spoiled for you if you're watching. So I like to let everybody know that. Sometimes I forget. Thanks, Taylor, over there for reminding me. So let's jump into this and start with plots. I want to discuss this piece. It's one of the most fun aspects of this file that we're reading. And I think, Terez, this file that we're starting with, this was, I think you told me this had to do with maybe it was right after he had written The Great Hunt, but before he started writing The Dragon Reborn. Is that what you said?
That's right. I mean, it's this one's one of those ones where it's pretty clear cut that he had already finished The Great Hunt. He's talking about events that happened at the end of the book. And if you're familiar with his notes, then you know that if things are, exactly like they happened in the books, he probably already wrote it because he changed his mind a lot, So he's talking about events at the end of The Great Hunt pretty much exactly as they happened, but he's also talking about things from the first few chapters of The Dragon Reborn that turned out way different. So it was probably just as soon as he finished writing The Great Hunt, took his vacation, maybe even before the book was published, is when he wrote this file.
Yep, absolutely. And for those of you that are watching on Twitter or Facebook, come back over to YouTube afterwards if you enjoy this kind of live show. Like the video, subscribe if you like. We really appreciate it. Again, it's just one of those things. It supports us. It makes us want to get up and do more of these shows. Now, let's jump into this first. And what we're going to show you are quotes from the notes and discuss these. This first one I liked because it was more of this general idea that he had about what he wanted to do with some of the main characters. So let me show you that quote first. He wrote, "They spread out these small parties, Rand and Matt alone, then Rand and Matt together, Perrin and Loial together, then Perrin and Loial alone, Egwene and Nynaeve and Elaine, each seeing simple, small, ordinary life as well as the grand." So I like this one, first of all, because there's some fun things there. We never actually get Perrin and Loial alone. And we don't ever get Loial alone, but he did consider breaking them up at one point. So I really like that aspect. And then he does question here whether or not he's going to include Elaine with Egwene and Nynaeve. I thought that was really interesting that he hadn't decided by this point that that was going to be this kind of threesome that it ends up being, of friends, basically. Yeah, go ahead, Terez.
I read that a different way because that's pretty much how it ended up in the book, because Swan didn't want to include Elaine in the group because, for one thing, Elida was keeping an eye on her, and there were so many more risks to including Elaine in the group. So she just went to Egwene and Nynaeve with her mission at first, and Elaine, found out about it from them. So that's kind of how I read it. Like, I don't know, maybe I have to go back and read it again.
Yeah,
and I agree, Terez. That's exactly what I saw. And also, too, he hadn't really decided how the politics was going to work here, whether Elida would go with them even, he mentions in one of the files. He considers Elida following them. I don't know, maybe I have to... And
yeah, and
also, yeah.
I was going to say, it's one of the ones we'll bring that quote up that kind of connects those three on later. I think that's that piece of it of whether Elaine was always in his plans. It seemed like he was questioning exactly how she'd be included, but that she probably would be. I think his note on this, and maybe Taylor, I can have you throw that one up. It's the 8th quote under plots with Egwene and Nynaeve. He wrote, Egwene and Nynaeve set by the Amyrlin seat to track down any of the Black Aja left in Tarvalon, or maybe just to track down the Black Aja anywhere, maybe limited to Liandrin, and possible those who went with her. Amyrlin would try to leave Elaine out of this, but I suspect Elaine would want in anyway, especially once she discovered Liandrin, in particular, was the query. Elida would certainly meddle in this, especially if Elaine manages to get involved. They will have some success and some failure in this, with perhaps a victory of some significant degree. So
it's pretty much exactly what happened.
Exactly.
Except that Elida didn't follow, and then you get all the messy politics then. And he also explored, in a quote very similar, about whether Elida would try and depose Swan, which of course
eventually happened.
Yeah, which eventually does happen. Yeah,
rather than Elida following them.
That was one of the plots that I thought was interesting that does kind of follow through with how he did have it planned there. And there wasn't a lot. He didn't really mark down. He just said there's going to be some success, some failure, right? He hadn't developed what that was going to turn into, because I don't think he knew exactly where they were going at that point. Because a lot of the other the file kind of explains that he doesn't know exactly where Rand and Matcham were going to go either. So maybe we jump back to that. I want to bring up a piece of that kind of general split, because I know a lot of people asked there as far as, Perrin and Loial splitting up. Tom, he adds a little note about Tom, which helps us understand this a little bit more. So let's show the quote about Tom. He wrote, Tom Merrilin perhaps meets Matt in Tarvalon. What is Tom doing there? Maybe looking for Moraine? Not likely to admit it if he is. Maybe Tom and Matt travel together until they are separated. Thereafter, Tom joins up with Perrin, who has now separated from Loial, while Matt joins up with Rand. So I thought that was interesting. He meant to have Perrin and Loial, well, at least initially, split up. And then he meant to have Tom connect with Perrin, which does kind of, I don't know, it shifts that a little bit. You kind of wonder, would that have really even fit with Tom ending up with Perrin back in the Two Rivers? That would have been an interesting shift to the plot itself. And maybe he didn't know that he was immediately going to the Two Rivers at that point, because I know that was still kind of a question of when that would happen.
Yeah. And I don't think that Tom and Perrin as a pair would have worked very well. They're just two very different archetypes.
Yeah, I'm glad. It always did feel a little bit to me like I never really liked Tom's arc after he splits from Matt. I never really personally enjoyed him being with Elaine and Egwene and such. I mean, sort of with Nynaeve. But again, it's one of those what could have would have happened there, and he did want to kind of split out Loial alone there, and I want to bring that up just talking about it. So Taylor, give us quote 7 about Loial. This so people understand when he was going to split him up, he had this plot set, or this idea of a plot. He said, Loial finds a steading overrun with all the Ogier killed. He travels via the ways to carry word and warning. Did a young Ogier woman who gave him a flower die there or elsewhere? If so, how did she come there and why? And I love this aspect that he was going to have Loial kind of like, have this like individual adventure, which I thought was actually kind of fun. I actually wish we would have seen something like that now. But he was planning on splitting them up, and I thought that was an interesting way to split them. Did you like?
He was also never having Loial married, apparently, and that their romance never happened, never blossomed.
Well, I kind of put that flower. Is that from Aerith, right? Like he eventually.
Yes, it is Aerith. Yeah.
And this one was going to be
not even named there.
And this person was going to die potentially, yes, and so right. Interesting kind of change in arc there. Yeah. Terez, any thoughts on that idea of putting Tom with Perrin and splitting up Loial with this kind of singular adventure?
Yeah, I kind of agree that Tom and Perrin is not such a great duo. Tom and Matt play off each other really well because they're very similar. I don't want to say they're similar in personality because they're really not, but neither one of them are particularly reserved. So that's how they play off each other, just by speaking their mind basically at all times.
Well, they're both tricksters. That's why they work well together. They feed off each other.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of wondering, for those of you that are watching in chat, would you have liked to have seen Loial go off on his own adventure, something similar to this, or maybe that exact idea? Give me a thumbs up in chat, or for those of you that are watching on Twitter, just really like to see what the fans think about that plot that ended up getting dropped, and he never went back to it. I mean, he gave Loial a love interest, and the flower ended up not being from that. So what's interesting, I'm seeing just initial kind of feedback, some no's originally so far from fans. So let's jump to it, because I think this one, Matt, is an interesting one also. So let's jump and kind of talk about kind of plots for Matt. And it's number 4, Taylor. So there wasn't a ton here. He just said that Matt will leave Tar-Valon after making an enemy of Galad, and he will end up in the Aiel Waste with Rand. And then he said Rand and Matt meet where, when, and how, and Matt meets a girl here or later. That's all that we really get that I saw. I don't know if either of you saw anything else for Matt's arc there, but it basically was like, hey, Matt's going to leave and make an enemy of Galad. Do you think that there's any reality to that being what happened when Matt beats Gawain and Galad with his quarterstaff? Do you believe there's any enmity there? Or do you think that was just an idea that he had that he never followed up on?
I think that it's a theme in Robert Jordan's notes that he was always going to make Galad something other than he became. There were all these evil plans for Galad, like he was going to be a dark friend and he was going to kill this person and that person. Like in his head, like Galad was going to be this huge contrarian figure throughout the story, and it's like he just couldn't bring himself to make him that when he actually sat down to write. So it's interesting to see that is still alive at this point in the story, because it's definitely present before he actually wrote the first book. There's a lot of that,
But this one's less dark than some of those other earlier ones. He's toning Galad down and he basically goodens him all the way through the books.
Yeah.
I actually did see a bit more on Matt in the individuals file about like the whole debate about being linked to the horn and that his luck is a side effect of the dagger. He does actually mention the quarterstaff duel there, and about what Matt saw in the portal stones, which was the other interesting thing.
Yeah, he does. He expresses. I didn't grab that quote. He doesn't he say that a lot of the lives that he lived through the portal stone trip were ones where he betrayed Rand. Was it Rand specifically?
Yes, and he doesn't want to be disloyal like those Matts were. And there was also this thing that Matt feels that Perrin and Rand have outgrown him. They have progressed, and Matt feels left behind, and he doesn't like that. So he's feeling that he's feeling very competitive, which is quite interesting, and insecure. So that was the other thing. And also Yeah.
I was just gonna say it's kind of true because his story dragged behind the others because
Oh,
of
it
the dagger.
totally did. And he was always the most immature of them anyway. So, that doesn't change.
Yeah, for that quote they bring up, I'll post this quote later, in social media about what Matt was feeling. But yeah, it was touching. When I read it,
that was really interesting.
I was affected by that. Matt, Jordan saying that to Matt, he felt some jealousy, that everyone from his village had been kind of growing and going through kind of growth of some sort, whether or not it was stuff that he didn't, not that he wanted to be a male channeler, not that he wanted to have Perrin's abilities, not that he wanted to be an Aes Sedai. He just noticed they were all growing and he wanted to grow, but he felt like he was still just a farm boy who got tainted by the dagger pretty much. And every once in a while spoke in the old tongue. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting insight to his character. And I think it does hold true. Some of the stuff that we're talking about from the notes, just never ends up in the books, like we talked about an enemy of Galad that never turned out. But I think this slight jealousy of some sort does play out. I think I think what we do see in the books is the outcome of that feeling that he has of being maybe less than or just not having grown at all like his friends had. So yeah, that was a good thing to bring up. Really appreciate that, Linda.
He's also quite ambitious, Matt is. I mean, and he does end up marrying the richest woman in the world. So, he does, in fact, by his own terms, outdo them all.
That's hilarious.
I also picked up on, you mentioned the old tongue. That's his link to the old blood. And there was a sentence that said that this will allow him to understand things inside Terangrial. So this was that first hint that he's going to go to an other world through a Terangrial.
Nice.
That was rather cool, I thought.
Yeah, I missed that one. I'm gonna have to have you show me that one. That one's
I'll send
really
it
cool.
to you later so you can post it if you like.
Yeah, that one's cool. I thought
go ahead,
Terez.
Oh, before we move on from Matt, one thing that I noticed in the notes is that Robert Jordan said that Swan might make the suggestion that they could let him die and then they could control whoever would blow the horn. Or he said, or Varen might make that suggestion. And in the book, it was Varen who made the suggestion and Swan kind of glossed over it. His fate has not been decided yet. And Varen brought it up again and Swan got annoyed and she's like, are you quite finished?
That is
another thing that
I was just gonna say to that point, and then I'll let you go on.
Okay.
It is interesting that he does sometimes take ideas that he dropped, and then he puts them in the mouths of his characters as ideas that are nonsensical, right? You do see that in the books every once in a while. We're like, oh my gosh, this is a plot he actually thought about. Just like Berlain, the idea that he put in the notes that he might connect Matt or Perrin to her. And then later on in the books, you see her kind of look at Matt and she's like, no, he's too much like me. This idea that he had decided I'm not going to connect them, but then he had used that idea as like an interesting kind of piece of dialogue in the books. So it makes us kind of almost hear kind of or feel a resonance of some of these ideas that never actually kind of played out. So sorry, Terez, go ahead.
I was just going to say that he says in the notes that they contemplate that Rand being the one to have blown the horn or the one who's tied to the horn would give him too much power. And this is something that he was going to have them discuss in the book, but they never did. That possibility was never even brought up in their whole conversation about it, which was interesting.
Yeah. That's all the decisions. I think that's one of the most compelling pieces of kind of studying his notes is just all the decisions he had to make. And in the end, I find very few that I'm not a fan of compared to what he wrote. And for those of you that are watching, he did a lot of writing about, obviously, the foundation of the Eye of the World and the Great Hunt. We'll come back and do episodes later about those. There's some really interesting things that he thought about early on that never made it in the books. Things seem a little more formed by this point versus some of those early kind of radical ideas, if you will. I wanted to jump into some of the things he wrote about Rand. I think that has a lot of content as far as what plots he was thinking about. So let's check out this first quote about Rand. He said Rand goes to the Aiel Waste, to the city in the middle of the waste, where he learns the origins of the Aiel. Prior to this, we must see the Aiel fight, I think. And then he also, just underneath that, had written, Rand goes to Tyr, ? The stone of Tyr and Kalendor, the sword that cannot be touched. Now, he does mention the sword that cannot be touched in the Eye of the World and in the Great Hunt, I believe. But it still seemed like he wasn't sure, from how I read the file, he wasn't exactly sure the order in which, at first, of what he planned to do. He definitely, from what I've read, wanted Rand to end up in the Aiel Waste, almost from the very beginning. I remember reading some things early on, and I think when he was writing The Eye of the World, where he talks about this idea of him going to the Aiel Waste. But this idea of him going to Tyr, it didn't seem like he knew exactly when to plot that. Did you both feel that? Or do you think that he always kind of had this, he was always meaning to go to Tyr and then to the Aiel Waste?
Well, I don't know if you noticed this, but the end of the file seems to have written a lot later than the first part of the file. Like, he came back later and added some more notes to it after he had worked a lot of things out in his head. And at the beginning of the file, he definitely doesn't have this plan, but by the time he gets to the end of the file, you start to see how he's kind of starting to plan on having everybody converge in Tyr. And I'm not sure if he had actually started writing yet at that point. He might have. I don't see anything to indicate any one way or the other. But at the beginning of the file, he definitely doesn't have that plan. And then it starts to kind of work towards everybody converging in the Stone of Tyr.
Yeah,
by the end of it.
Because he writes that Matt, he said, Rand and Matt are going to meet, and he's like, where and when, right? That was
right.
Closer to the beginning of the file of this not knowing. He knew that he wanted to use it. It didn't seem like you're saying that he knew exactly the order, but yeah, I think by the end he does. There are a couple of other quotes here. I'm going to throw this up. It goes along with this idea of kind of building this idea out. The second file for Rand, it's not the second file, second set of quotes. Jordan wrote, something must set Rand off on his trip. What? Does he sneak away? If not, he'll have plenty of argument manipulation from Moraine. He also wrote, does Rand travel by means of the ways or portal stones? Is his control of the power good enough? Is he foolish and desperate enough? And then he wrote this last note, whatever Rand has set out after, how is it that he ends up in the city in the waste? So this is early on where he's saying, like, I do want Rand to kind of leave, be on his own or maybe with some of the soldiers. He kind of wasn't sure if it was going to be him going alone or not. And that he eventually needed to get the Aiel Waste. And he was still kind of playing with this idea of what was the motivation for him leaving. And I wanted to play that up a little bit. I thought it was really interesting, this last set of quotes about Rand. This one, I'll read this one and then I'll go back to the quote that I wanted to bring up. He wrote, Rand sets out from the mountains of mist. If he is intent on the sword that cannot be touched, how does he intend to fetch it alone? Perhaps he takes Shinarans with him, or perhaps some sneak after him, Rhaegan and Massima. So, again, he was still kind of forming this idea of how does Rand sneak away? Who is he with? If he does go to the stone, how does he get there alone? And one of the things I thought was interesting was the motivation for him leaving. He brings up Selene and Lanfear, and maybe he'll tell some of the, maybe he'll end up telling Perrin about the dreams and that they'll learn about this or it's Min that knows something about it. They'll learn about that he's leaving and maybe he's going after Selene and Lanfear. And I thought that was interesting that he kind of connected Rand and Selene early on as far as, and it kind of makes sense why it ends with the Great Hunt as it does. That you kind of get this feeling like he was going down that road, but then he stopped. Why do you think that he didn't continue that route, connecting the two of them, and that Rand was kind of going off after her?
Well, he took the bit about the dreams, and, well, he said in the file that Rand was hardly ever going to be the point of view character in this book, so he had that set out. And he took the bit about dreams and made it a conversation between him and Perrin, where it's in Perrin's point of view. So Perrin doesn't know what Rand is thinking, but Rand keeps talking about dreams. And he mentions them like a few times before he disappears, his dreams, but we don't know what they're about, right? We're not supposed to know what they're about. So, yeah, that's all I wanted to say about that. Sorry.
Well, he also said that Rand wanted to get it over with. He fears going mad or breaking the world. He assumes he's doomed, but it's his duty. he becomes impatient with Moraine, making them wait. I mean, we saw all this happen, and this is in the individual's file. So that's kind of the actual frustration ends up being the trigger. And then he says that a bit further down in that file, Rand can't win by using the other methods that the false dragons have used, and he wants to unite people with as little war as possible. And so he thinks if he gets Kalendor and holds it, people are going to accept him and unite, which actually did kind of happen in the books. That's exactly what he thought. But it was always going to be wrong, and that his breaking would actually be the nations breaking up and new ones forming, and wars over whether he is or isn't a dragon, that this would be the actual breaking that Rand would be responsible for, and that he would in fact have to unite the world by force largely. So that actually did happen. So by the end of that file, he'd actually decided on the motivation, basically.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the things he brings up before he wants him to show up in the Aiel Waste. He wants to see the Aiel fight. And then he also talked about Rand, maybe, like you said, looking into finding a people, right? Going to the Almoth Plain, because he knew they had some supporters there, true, potentially. And then it seems like he kind of converges these ideas of like, I have the Stone of Tyr. I want to see the Aiel fight. I want Rand to kind of get a people behind him. And then I want him to go to the Aiel Waste. And then he probably answered that question of, okay, that's where Mat will be. That's where Mat will meet him. That's where Egwene and Nynaeve will show up. So like this idea of where they would converge kind of seemed to piece together after he went after this idea of Rand wanting, maybe seeking out after people, and then wanting to go to the Aiel Waste and kind of mixing it in with this Tyr connection with Kalendor. So I think it makes sense how it kind of all pieced together to me there. But yeah, I thought that one was really that piece about Rand of not knowing at first. Because I always think by the end of the Great Hunt, he knows exactly what he's planning next. And so reading this was kind of like, he knew pieces, but he certainly was still kind of piecing it together. Was there anything else plot-wise for the both of you that you read in this file that you thought was an interesting change, or something that did end up making it in that you were surprised, or something that he modified, or something that he dropped that we didn't cover?
There were a few things, like he was going to have Egwene maybe figure out that they needed to go to Tyr from Dreams, and they ended up getting the weird evidence plant thing of all the stuff that the Escape 13 Black Aja left behind, and that had all the clues pointing towards Tyr, which I still think is weird because that was Lanfear, right? That gave him the evidence.
Yes, I believe so. Yep.
Yeah, disguised as Else Grimwell. And then Egwene decided to go to the Dream to see if she could, figure something out. And she ran into Lanfear there too, as Sylvie, and didn't really learn anything. But they did decide to go to Tyr based on that, even though there wasn't much to it. So yeah, that always kind of struck me as sort of a weak point in that book. Just the whole trap thing of the evidence that they left behind.
Yeah, I don't know that he had that one. Again, not initially, he didn't know how to get them there, it didn't seem like, and he kind of built this idea out. And you're bringing up a kind of a world-building piece here. And so I want to put this quote up there because I think this will surprise everyone that's watching when it comes to the world of dreams, Tel'aran'rhiod. So I want to cover a little bit of world building here. Taylor, can you throw up the quote for Tel'aran'rhiod? It's number 2. This is what Robert Jordan wrote in his notes. He said, "There are worlds, dream worlds, that can be reached by dreams that are as real as those reached by the portal stones, ? Like he was asking himself, and it's really interesting. It made me go back and look up Tel'aran'rhiod, which is the first time you hear about it is in the Dragon Reborn. And then you think back through all of the events. They have the things that Balsamon does, even the things that Egwene sees are in dreaming, but not necessarily in Tel'aran'rhiod. And so this idea of what Tel'aran'rhiod was still seems to have been something that he was still piecing together, right? Like there's going to be this other world, kind of like Portal Stone worlds, but it's like a dream, but it's its own world and it has its own rules. Is pretty much what But he was starting to form that. I always thought that was going to be, like, I thought that was the eye of the world. I thought he had figured that piece out. Linda, did that surprise you, or did you read that the same way as I did?
Yeah, he was still quite fluid on things. He knew that portal stones would need channeling. He knew that they went to worlds that are alternate realities of varying degrees of probability. But then he says that, well, the world of dreams or dreams are a different thing again. So he was kind of working out whether the portal stones could reach the Talaran Riod or Talaran Riod, like whether he knew that Talaran Riod, you can actually go there and go to other worlds as well. So, you know, he's trying to work out the logistics of all that, which things could go where. So yeah, that was still not decided at all.
Yeah, so and he doesn't even name it there, right? He was just like, it's like a dream,
that's why
but it's
I
like
hesitated there. He didn't call it Talaran Riod.
Yeah, he didn't in that
Anywhere.
initial file, right? Like he didn't seem to have that name picked out, or at least it wasn't in the file by the time that the Great Hunt was over. And so this next piece that kind of goes along with it, which is, and this is another interesting one for me as a fan. I think people will like this one. Taylor, can you throw up the third quote? It's what I would call kind of early dreamwalking concept. Robert Jordan wrote in his notes, "It is possible that what happened to Matt and Perrin when Baalzamon invaded their dreams broke some sort of barrier for them. Maybe they are now able to enter dreams that are not dreams themselves, though certainly not under conscious control at first, if ever. This would have nothing to do with the One Power, though both would be afraid that it did." So to me, this suggests that he was kind of like this idea he was building out this idea of Teleron Riad, and then he was suggesting that his metaphysics might account for somebody kind of breaking into your dreams would break down a barrier that would enable you to enter this dream world more easily. It's not really a talent. It's just this ability that you would gain because of what Baalzamon did. And so I thought that was, at least for me, I read that and I was like, oh, wow, and that Matt and Perrin might actually have this thing. And that really explains the thought process behind what happens to Rand early on in like chapter 9, at least to me. That kind of gives me a better understanding of what he might have been thinking when Baalzamon visits Rand and in his dreams. And it does seem like Rand starts displaying kind of dreamer-like capabilities. But it seems like he was kind of building this idea around the dream world early on as not as well connected or well pieced together as we kind of imagined. So yeah, I thought that one was really an interesting piece. What do you, as far as the Dreamwalking and Teleron Riad, did you see anything else? Did either of you see anything else in the file that had to do with that kind of gave us an idea of what he was planning on it? Or do you think this was completely new that he came up with after the Great Hunt?
I mean, he'd already done the Eye of the World. Randers having his own links to past lives could explain why he would be more susceptible to being able to use that talent thereafter. It was interesting. Nowhere does Matt ever show any such talent at all. So it's Perrin that he worked up to be a dreamer or dream walker, if you like, in the end. But no, that was really quite interesting and seemed to come from nowhere.
Well, and to that point, I saw this, someone ask in chat, what about the wolf dream, basically? We don't have any evidence that there are wolves in Teleron Riad before this moment. We just see them show up in his dreams. And so I think that he was still building out the concept that Perrin, like you said, I think he went with this idea, but only gave it to Perrin, but then he connected it to the wolf powers instead of Baalzamon.
Shamanism and that. Yeah, he's only just starting to even work up the wolf powers in these files. That's what I was actually going to mention next. So he was trying to work out whether, how Perrin felt about all this. Because Perrin did actually fear going mad from the wolf side of his character in the Dragon Reborn. And there's all about what Perrin saw in the portal stones too, and how he was always linked to Rand to battle with the shadow. But sometimes in his past lives, Perrin actually did have his wolf side take over.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was super interesting to me, and he puts origin of werewolf myth. So, which was also awesome, I thought.
Yeah, you just brought up this because I think that question among fandom has always been, what did everyone else see? At least when they went through the portal stone, we only get Rand's view, and then we get Matt saying something, and I think it does have Perrin. If I'm not mistaken, in the Great Hunt, Perrin is kind of
resigned that he has to do this duty. In the notes, it says that he does resent this, and he really fears the axe because he doesn't want to be violent, which is also true. But of course, the notes also show that the seed of the idea for Noam, because he says, do we see someone who actually becomes a wolf?
And then he says, yes, I think we do.
Noam. So that actually was quite an early development in these notes.
Yeah, that he still hadn't worked it out.
No, he had not.
But that, for those that are watching, in his notes, he does mention specifically that Perrin sees, like Linda said, when he goes to the portal stone, he sees a lot of lives where he gives in to the wolf side, right? And that, and what's interesting about that is I think that portal stone journey affected a lot of them, and getting some insight, at least what Jordan was thinking about and what might have been, does give you some insight of why Perrin maybe even more reserved. And I want to say we all give Perrin kind of a hard time about like making a decision and why are you so slow? And, and we kind of just take for granted the fact that he's maybe slower in making these things from when we first meet him. But going through that portal stone and recognizing just how on the edge maybe he might give in someday and what might happen if he does, at least for me, it kind of, it gave me better insight into what I thought, what Perrin might be going through. So was there anything else?
It made me think, the portal stones made me, these notes on the portal stones made me think that they were traumatized by all this. And you can really understand Perrin's terror of going mad and becoming a wolf. And even Matt starting to hate himself because he's going to be a Judas-like figure if he's not careful. And so,
I want to know what Varen saw.
Yeah,
I know, that wasn't in there.
I never thought I would, it was something that she never thought she would have done. So
it's so, by the way, I know those who are watching, you're like, man, why can't I read these notes? But for us, like even having read them, there's things that just are missing that you still want to know, right? There's this file, and I think it's really interesting. The file that we're talking about lists random people. It doesn't list a lot of Forsaken. Maybe later on when the file's complete, maybe he completes it later on, but it just doesn't list like.
No, they're just not in there. They're not in the plots. And the other person who's missing is Avienda. She's just not there. There's no. He's got notes on how Perrin's going to meet a girl in the Dragon Reborn, and Matt will meet a girl when and who. And there's nothing about Avienda, even though Min had already had that viewing. Well, though I think nothing much is made of her viewing until till literally in the Dragon Reborn, I think.
Yeah, what were you saying, Terez? You're talking about the
remember.
Forsaken? It was about the Forsaken.
I was going to say that he wrote like a ton of notes about Aludra.
Yes.
Under he said other Forsaken : and then it's just this whole section on Aludra, and and he didn't remember her name. He just put like blank. We're talking about that illuminator woman, or maybe I can't remember. Yeah, her name was mentioned in the Great Hunt, wasn't it? I think it was.
Yes, it was because she and They abused each other, the Illuminators. They insulted each other.
Well, one of the things he does bring up is the dragons. So for those of you that are watching, if you're kind of wondering if Aludra and the eventual dragons was part of an early idea, yes, it was in his notes after the Great Hunt that dragons, the dragons that we come to know, were there so early. And that's what I think is fascinating, is what was there that he really clearly kind of like, and like you said, Terez, he writes this like, it's like it's like a full page about the Illuminators and and why this is about to happen and why basically she does what she does and eventually is going to come up with the dragons. So that was an early one that I thought was really cool to kind of see in his notes as compared to some of these other ones. Like you said, Avienda's missing and a lot of people are missing. So.
Yes, that's right. Well, not
One of the things that he complained about is when people describe the Wheel of Time as being medieval, and he would always tell them that no, it's 19th century without gunpowder. So he obviously had this plan to introduce gunpowder or something similar to it, from early on, because it was the historical setting otherwise was consistent with a world that should have discovered gunpowder by now. So that was
well and truly.
And the Illuminators were the reason why it didn't exist, because they guarded the secret so closely. So yeah, that was definitely one of the things that he would have had to justify to himself as a reader of history from the very beginning of the story.
Well, and by the way, I see a comment by Andrew. He mentioned that he certainly had to come up with Avienda. Yes, she definitely ends up in the book, right? So there's a lot here that ends up in the book that's never laid out in the files exactly. He ends up writing, and I don't know if these were just kind of working files of like, this is where he was like, basically it was, this is where things are at right now, and here's some questions I have. But yeah, I didn't see any mention of Avienda this early in any other file related to the Dragon Reborn. Did either of you? It just seems like he just added her. That's right. She shows up.
He's definitely, for all that we think that this was that he'd written 2 books, I think he went back and revised them. I don't, after he got partway through the Dragon Reborn, because there's a whole heap. The world building is different. The nations are different to what he had planned here. He had Kyrian as being like Victorian England and Imperial Germany. No, it isn't. So he must have gone back and changed cultures. So and Tyr being like Imperial Russia, for instance. So that did not happen.
That's why
I think that there's a lot of revision of even the first 2 books as he was going through the Dragon Reborn.
Well, that's what I was going to say. That's why I mentioned at the beginning, this is like words of if. For those of you that are still watching us, and if you're still watching us on Facebook or Twitter, I can't see any questions you might be posing. We're going to kind of reach out to have fans give us a call here shortly. If you want to give us a call and have a question, we'll open those phone lines in the next 5 or 10 minutes. And so if you are watching on Facebook or Twitter, you want to come over here and chat, and you want to throw a question up, or you do want to give us a call, feel free to do that also. I did want to mention one last kind of world building piece that I thought was really interesting about ta'veren. I call it the early ta'veren tracking. Let me show you that quote. He wrote, "Note, perhaps Perrin can track Rand partly by his effect on others. He is so strongly ta'veren that he alters people's lives just by being near them." Obviously, we see that happen, but this idea that Perrin could track him because he's ta'veren also, and we do see this. It doesn't happen in the Dragon Reborn, but we do see this whole idea of the window opening and they can see the colors. Eventually, he does kind of pull this idea back in, but it was that seemed kind of like the early nascent like beginnings to what that eventually became. Was there anything else from the world building side that you thought was quite interesting from these files related to the Dragon Reborn that we just haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, he also goes. It's the theology, which, as you know, is I've always been very interested in and written a bit about. Millenarianism is very obvious in those notes, where people think that because the Trolloc Wars were like 1,000 years into the New Age, and the War of the 100 Years was 2,000 years into the New Age, so that with them reaching 1,000 in the new era, that of course the last battle will occur. So there's that whole threeness, different sub-epochs, and also the millenarianism. So the number symbolism is getting more and more prominent, and so is the millenarianism. So that was really interesting. So,
but by the way, I don't know what that word translates as. I don't know if people are watching. When you say millenarianism, can you?
Well, the belief, the millennium,
the belief
millennium. That
gotcha.
The 1,000-year history can be divided up into significant periods of 1,000 years. So, and basically, he was being influenced, I think, by the turn of the century coming up into the year 2000. So, and it's just one of those little inputs that he's put into the series.
He also put in the notes that it was an erroneous belief, probably because, all the years that past like the War of the 100 Years, is stuck between two of those eons. One thing that I thought was interesting was in the Matt notes, he was talking about how he was going to find a ter'angreal, and originally he was going to have him learn about it while he was in the tower, but he didn't know where this ter'angreal was supposed to be, and it ends up being the ter'angreal that was in the Stone of Tyr, which doesn't actually show up until book 4. But he was discussing that in this file, like it was something that Matt was going to find out about in Tar Valon. Maybe being one of the girls.
I was going to say, along with that, he does seem like he didn't know that Tyr was going to be this place that had a lot of ter'angreal. It seemed like he added that in. So I wonder if when he changed where that was going to happen, he wanted to give kind of a place. Why would Matt find it there? Well, that's because Tyr has all this stuff versus Tar Valon. I wonder if those two connected where he...
They did actually in one of the files that we were talking about looking at, where it was like the High Lords had collected all this stuff to cover over the fact that they had Kalendor. And that was actually mentioned in the books as an actual motivation. The other thing that interested me was that he also said that Matt would lose his left eye, probably as part of a bargain, and he would gain the Ashundarai, which he didn't name as such, but he described it in fact, better detail than he ever did in the books. So,
did he? I thought the first thing I read about that was that I didn't think that he had the concept of how or why he would lose his eye. I thought he just kind of had it in notes, like he's going to lose his eye.
Probably as part of a bargain. Yeah. Okay. So that's all it said. And the Ashundarai wasn't named as such, but it was described very accurately.
Yeah, I was hoping we're going to see in the notes where it said what that was and what its use was, and it didn't, right? No. It just described it. It's almost like he kept some things...
described it super accurately.
Yeah, I wonder if he had it in mind and some things he just left out of his notes because even he didn't. I don't know if he. This goes back to Varen. I wish we had more about her in the same regard. For those of you that are watching, we would, if we knew if there was a Varen section in this early books, we would have shared it by now. That was one of my favorite characters.
Oh yeah.
So for those of you that are watching for the first time, don't know, this is a live call-in talk show. So you can give us a call if you would like to ask one of my fine panelists a question about the notes, about something you've heard us talk about. Just wondering if there's, was some mention of a certain topic that you're interested in. The number is 1-313-825-5968. That's 1-313-TALK-WATT. Feel free to give us a call. Again, let's try to keep it to the notes, but if it's anything Wheel of Time related, I'm sure one of these two panelists I have here, Linda Terez, will be able to answer it. So before and while we wait to see if there's any callers, there were a couple questions that some fans asked on Instagram, so I wanted to ask you both these questions. Aaron asked, had RJ already planned for the flaw in Kalendor, and did he already know it would be able to amplify the true power? So is that something that you ever saw in any of the notes that you've read, that there was some indication about there being a flaw and what the flaw was?
Certainly not in the early notes.
So yeah, that wasn't planned for, probably. Yeah.
The flaw that was described in the books early on, just the inability to control the power. Yeah. I might have seen something about that in the notes, but if I'd have seen something about the true power stuff or any of that, it would have stuck out to me, and I haven't seen anything like that.
Yeah, that's a good. Thank you. Appreciate that answer. And then. We also got a question, I think it was Takaran Riyad asked this question. At this point, how many more books did he think it would take to complete the story?
3.
3 more after this. I did see that I thought I saw in a different file, that he kind of had marked out 6 or 7 total books.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was, he didn't name them at all at that point. In fact, I saw that he wasn't really sure if this was the time this book he was going to call The Dragon Reborn or not. He wrote something like, is it time, or should we, basically, should I use this title now? And I think he just didn't know how far he'd get in the books and where he was going. But yeah, I would say, wasn't it, I think that was the whole concept, that didn't he think that it was going to be a 6-book series at this point? Or was he still... Yeah, it was somewhere like that 6 books. So So that's the answer. I know we have some callers that I want to ask this last question, and then we'll get to the callers. Rob wrote, I've read that the bloody hand and white-hot iron Min sees around Rand in Eye of the World originally referred to a punishment he was going to get, and that RJ decided to drop. Did something similar happen with Perrin? I always find it strange that she saw trees flowering around him, and it doesn't seem to fit him. So do either of you have the answer to those two questions? As far as did RJ actually decide to drop this idea of Rand, this punishment he was going to get, as far as the
that was in a very early file. Like the surrounding context for that is just like completely bonkers.
Is it too much? Do we? It's its own episode. We'll need.
He was captured by Morgaze, and she inflicted this on him, and Elaine tried to save him, but could only commute it down to like losing his hand rather than being executed.
Oh yes, I remember this one. That's gonna take a whole different. So we'll come back. That needs its own episode because, like I said to you,
I don't remember anything about Perrin in the trees flowering. I always thought that was about.
That was never.
Yeah, in the notes, I don't. It might be in there, but I don't remember it. Yeah, I always thought that was about his family, you know, because they were buried on.
And Loial said that
in an apple orchard.
Yeah, and Loial said that he would sing to the trees. So but it was
that one. Yeah,
much. You know, it wasn't a really big deal. Some of Min's viewings aren't a big deal. They're kind of so mundane.
But I think
get annoyed about it.
But I think it is true that there were some things in there originally that maybe he was going to go somewhere with an idea. The good thing is, it's just one of these where he didn't have to answer them all. And I think he always told us he wasn't going to give us an answer for them all. I'm sure some cases were like, oh, because
there was a good reason.
Yeah, I ended up not going down this road. So we have some callers. Let's bring our first caller. It's CJ from Virginia. CJ, welcome to the Dusty Wheel tonight. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. So what's your question for us?
Okay, so I've loved what you guys have talked about tonight. I'm wondering, under the assumption that Rafe has had access to these notes, is there anything in the notes that you've already spoken about tonight or can speak of that you'd like to see explored more in depth on the show adaptation?
So this is I like both these questions. The first one I would say, I don't know. These, like I said, these notes, and I think we've kind of tried to describe this, they aren't really canon. And so I don't know how much they would help, I guess, they would help Rafe know what Robert Jordan was thinking at a point in time, but not necessarily what ended up in the books and what was the characterization. So I don't know that Rafe has these, and I don't know how useful they would be to him. But and to your second question, I want to ask the panelists this: is there something here? And I think CJ, correct me if I'm wrong, but or feel free to kind of ask the question again if I get this wrong. Is there something that you've read in the notes, Linda and Terez, that you wish he would have explored that he didn't, and that maybe could be explored in the TV series?
A number of things.
Yeah, that's exactly my question.
Okay, good. So Terez, go for it.
Mine are all controversial.
Go for it. Why not mention it?
I really wish that he hadn't ditched Time and Dread for one thing. For another thing, I really wish he hadn't ditched. Well, he didn't ditch it. I think Brandon ditched it. But originally, Egwene was going to end up with Galad after Gawain died. And Galad was going to raise Gawain's baby. She was supposed to be pregnant with Gawain's baby when Gawain died. And speaking of the Dragon Reborn, there's actually a little line in the Dragon Reborn that counts as foreshadowing for that. Because Tom said something to Matt. Matt said something ridiculous, and Tom said something about the White Cloak marrying the Amerlin seat. The Lord Captain Commander of the White Cloaks marrying the Amerlin seat. That's in the Dragon Reborn. So I always hoped that was foreshadowing. And then it didn't happen in the books. And then I read the notes and it was there. And I'm like...
By the way, everyone's going crazy in chat. They're like, wait a second, what?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
I mean, if Egwene had actually been pregnant, or she, the mother would have become a mother. So it would have brought a whole new level of meaning to the Emmelin's title of mother.
So yeah, Tamandred, are you both kind of thumbs up on this, that you would like to see them go back to that original idea of having Mazrim Taim be Tamandred? Or would you rather see them kind of keep it as it is in the books? I know Terez, you said you would like to see them pursue that in the TV series?
There's two reasons why I wish that he didn't ditch that. One of them is that Lord of Chaos is so solidly centered around that truth that it just doesn't make sense to most people that it's not true,
Right.
So, I mean, it's just the whole book from beginning to end, and literally the first scene to the last scene is all time and dread. And the second reason that I wish he hadn't ditched it is because he didn't seem to have a very clear idea of what to do with Tamandred after that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we haven't seen a whole lot of anything in the notes about it. And Brandon has said that the whole Shara backstory thing was all him. He had to come up with it because, Robert Jordan told everybody that Tamandred wasn't Taim. So what could he do, And I'm not going to say that plot line was necessarily bad. It did seem to come out of nowhere. And, I could nitpick it for a few reasons, but,
Yeah, for sure. We can do that again. And I think someone brought this up in chat one time. We should do like a whole episode about the history of that, idea.
Yeah.
Well, the whole Demon Dread plotline.
Yeah.
Linda, what they did come up with does work very well, just on the whole real life parallels type stuff, because Demon Dread was always supposed to be a Hannibal-like figure. And in fact, one time I actually, before the last book was published, I asked Sanderson whether it was possible to take an army over the pole of the world, because I had an idea that he would bring an army from Sean Chan that way, and the look on his face was very interesting. So, because obviously they were trying to work out, exactly how to do this, what army Demon Dread would come up with and how they would get it there and all that.
Yeah, for sure.
So I was close, but wrong direction.
Hey, CJ, thank you so much for calling in. A great question. And I hope you stick around and keep watching of us over at the Dusty Wheel. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, have a good evening.
Have a good night.
So Linda, was there one that you seen the notes that you would like to have seen, or either that Robert Jordan had followed through with the idea, or that Rafe or the TV series would?
I think that everything they managed to tie most things together at the end, Team Jordan, well enough that if Rafe sort of does go off in a completely different direction, it would become very complicated indeed. I mean, the whole world is really one of, well, to use Jordan's own metaphor, the most complicated clock ever. And if you start tinkering with it, I think it's going to make some horrible noises and not work very well. So I'm kind of keen to largely just go with what we've got. There's well and truly enough there.
That's a good note for Rafe. It'll start making noises that none of us want. I like it. Laura is online. Let's bring Laura into the show. Hey, Laura, welcome to the Dusty Wheel. How you doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
Good. So what's your question for us?
Yeah. So my question is if there are any notes that further advance Moraine's storyline. I really feel like she was very, very badass in the eye of the world. And then when she came back towards the end of the series, it seemed like there just wasn't really a great resolution for her. Is there anything indicating like what the original intention for her was to be, or was that how it was supposed to end?
Good question. Do either of you have an answer for that?
There were some notes about, some more detailed notes about what she went through that didn't make it into the books. But as far as after, it was just her and Tom, and that was it. And I don't know if that's because he didn't plan anything for her after, or because it just didn't work out for Brandon, or what. because we didn't get the notes about the very last books, his plots and stuff at the very end are not in the library. We didn't have access to those. So who knows what he left and what he didn't leave. But it might be one of those things that they just didn't get the chance to ask him what his plans were. So Brandon had to come up with something.
I mean, without those notes, we'll never know. We won't. You can't know. And that's partly why they are held over, of course.
As far as access to those, weren't we told that there would, fans could get access to those someday? I can't remember if it was like they had some time set aside.
Well, there are some things in the library that are timed, but I think most of those were actually labeled as contracts and stuff like that. So we won't be able to figure out, exactly how much money he was being paid or anything like that until well after, even Harriet is gone. I think the timing on them was something like 30 years. I don't remember. It was
exactly. 2035, I think. 2035, something like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're ever going to get access to those.
No. It may be that the last 3 book notes aren't even in the library yet.
Yeah, and I thought Brandon had said something about maybe eventually having access to them, or something having to do with the last book.
He did actually, yes, I think so, or that he would get permission.
Yeah, Laura, I'll tell you this. I'll make you this one comment that I did read something about her, and this surprised me. Robert Jordan said that her plan at the end of the Great Hunt, basically at the beginning of the Dragon Reborn, he said she didn't have a plan. And that she needed one. Like he's like, she needs to have a plan more so than just let the fact that he's Taviran. He said something like, the fact that he's Taviran and the wheel, that's her plan, was just to kind of send Rand out. And then he wrote something to the effect of, but she needs an actual plan. So that surprised me a little bit because I kind of thought that she had some plan, that he knew what her plan was from the very beginning for him. But by that point in the books, it doesn't seem like he had at least written it down or figured out exactly what it was post the Great Hunt, before the Dragon Reborn began. I don't know if that's something for you, but it's an interesting kind of an interesting fact that maybe he didn't have her figured out beyond the first couple of books, at least what role she was going to play in them. And maybe that kind of plays out to us, which is that's kind of the experience we end up having with her a bit, is her she ends up kind of following him and letting the wheel take him, and that basically. And so
it was her faith in the pattern, that the pattern knew had plans for him, and she didn't need to muck them up.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Laura,
I still think
oh, sorry, go ahead.
that she should have been Queen of Carian.
Yeah. Oh,
I wanted her to be the Queen of Carian so bad.
I'll tell you this.
Agreed. I'm like, what? She already has Andor. She doesn't need Carian too.
Well, when we do a show about the Great Hunt and the Eye of the World, there's a lot of things that Robert Jordan thought to do with her that didn't turn out. I'm glad they didn't. But yeah, she had some interesting ideas for storylines very early on.
Yeah, in some of the early notes, she was going to be Amerlin.
Yeah. That's right. But actually, in these the Dragon Reborn notes, he was considering making Galad king of Carian, or that he would have Carian and promoting Galad as the next king, or wanting him to, trying to scheme to make him the next king.
Yeah, these are fun. Just to be able to play with these ideas, how it could have turned out. Yeah.
So
hey, Laura, thank you so much for calling in. Really appreciate it. Hey, we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Yep, thank you. So we have one more caller. I did see a question before we bring this caller in. I saw a question from Joe in chat. He said, "Is there anything about Fail in the notes that we've read?" I didn't see anything about her as far as this early. Later on, I think he talks about her just once she's a character in the books. But no, I didn't see anything. Did either of you see
in this particular
something?
file, Perrin is going to meet a girl.
That's it.
All he knows that he wants to hook Perrin up with a girl, and then he goes on for a while about the hunters of the Horn and how they're going to run into them at various spots throughout the book. But he doesn't connect those two things until he actually gets into writing, I think.
And he also mentions that, he's wondering whether to bring the first of Mayene into the book. He knows it's a she, and the firsts don't have to be she's, But again, there's no name, there's no characteristics, no nothing, just this idea.
Yeah, she's almost more prominent in the notes as far as potential connection to Perrin than Fail is at that point.
But it's both are pretty tenuous.
Yeah, that's true. Let's bring our caller Josh into the show. Hey, Josh, welcome to the Dusty Wheel. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you guys?
Doing great. So what's your question for us?
All right, a couple of things. One was, since these are the notes on the Dragon Reborn, I wonder if he ever touched on the fact that maybe it's called the Dragon Reborn, yet we see so little of Rand in it. If there's like an explanation there that it's kind of, you make it seem like it's going to be about him, but it's really not.
Yes, there absolutely is. Not the contrast with the title, but at the very beginning of this file that we're discussing, he says that straight up front, that Rand is not going to be the point of view character throughout most of this book. He wants Rand to be going through his mental stuff, off screen, so to speak.
Yeah, and he does. And the question is, like you said, it's not directly connected to the title of the book, but maybe something I said earlier, Josh, was that he wasn't even sure that was going to be the title of the book, right? The Dragon Reborn, he wasn't sure if that was the one to use. And so I wonder if, maybe it just came together in the end that it was kind of an interesting piece that had very little point of view, but he called it the Dragon Reborn. But yeah, I think they were disconnected ideas, but he certainly did that one on purpose. You said you had a couple questions. Was there something else you wanted to ask us?
Yeah, I wonder if there was anything, because I think this is the first time, or we kind of get more expanded on Gaul in the Stone of Tyr. I wonder if there was anything about him in the notes.
Yeah, I saw this question come up about some other characters in the same way. Did you see anything about Gaul in the notes?
Not in these notes, no. No. All he knew was that he wanted to show the Aiel fight, which they did in Tyr, but also, of course, Perrin fights with Gaul, or side by side, during the journey down to Tyr. So
yeah, but nothing. It's really interesting that he really covers kind of like we even said, he doesn't even really lay out the Forsaken that end up in the book, what they're doing in this file. Now again, we don't necessarily have every version of this file ever created. I don't know if he filled one out and just didn't keep the file, deleted some. That's an unknown to us, right? We just have the files that we have access to, that fans can get access to at the library. And so we're reading these and going with what we have, right? So it sounds like he was building kind of foundational things with some of the main characters. And that's why it's weird when you get the First Main, and then you get Aludra, and you get some of these where he thought of them as important enough to mention, but other characters that we would have kind of assumed that were more important don't get a mention at all. So was there anything else, Josh, for me? Did you have another question?
That's pretty much it for now. I'm sure I'll have another question later on.
Okay, sounds good.
For this.
Well, thank you. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for calling in. I appreciate it. And feel free to jump into chat if you have any other questions for us, or give us a call another time.
Sounds great.
Evening. Yeah, thanks, man.
Bye.
I saw a question about Logain come up. I didn't see anything about Logain in the notes. Did you? Either of you?
There is a bit about Taim in this file.
Yeah, there's a bit about false dragons, but none of them are mentioned by name except Taim.
Yeah, that's again, I know a lot of people are kind of curious, like, why not? And again, we don't know exactly why some of these didn't show up or not,
At this point, Logain had been gentled, so he was kind of not a factor until Lord of Chaos.
Yeah, that's true. And there was no need necessarily to bring him up, but it certainly, Aludra doesn't really, it's one of these where he wrote down, like, this is what I plan to happen for this person, but I probably didn't have any plans necessarily for some of these people at that point, right?
I guess he was hanging around White Tower and being depressed, but that was pretty much it until they escaped.
Nice. We do have one more caller. It'll be our last caller of the evening. Let's bring Seth into the show. Hey, Seth, welcome to the Dusty Wheel. How you doing tonight?
Pretty good. How are you guys doing?
Fantastic. So what's your question?
Well, things have seemed pretty serious throughout the night, so I figured, I just call and ask, what was the funniest thing you guys saw in the notes?
Ooh, that's the funniest thing you saw in the notes. Well, I feel like that requires us to go back a little bit in the notes. I don't know, at least for me. So I'm thinking of an idea, but I'll let Linda or Terez. Is there something that was really that you thought was funny that you wanted to bring in?
The way that he talks about lesbians in the notes is really funny.
Is it in this file or is it just in other files?
No, not in this file. Yeah. No, yeah, but he talks about, when he talks about lesbians, he gets kind of explicit with his language sometimes. You have to wonder why. He's writing notes for himself. Why? I don't know, but it's really funny. There's some other funny stuff in the notes. Time and Dread killing Asmodean was funny. That made me laugh a lot.
That makes me happy.
Same.
Linda, was there something funny that came up for you?
It's just some of the more ludicrous ideas at the beginning that he had of the plot ideas that were never developed. Thankfully, you just sort of wince at how they would have gone.
Yeah, I think those are some of the funnier ones where I don't know if it's funny. I don't know if that's the right word, but just like it's terrifying in an absurd way. You're reading it going like, I'm so glad that wasn't the book.
Exactly.
Some of his ideas almost sounded like Terry Goodkind had came up with. There's like some ideas where I go like, I'm so glad you didn't follow up on that one because that would have been a terrible idea.
There was a whole lot of rape in
there
early notes.
Massive amounts of
Yes, there's characters where you're just like, why did that happen? Rand end up the beggar side. He does go into that. It's not necessarily like funny. It's just funny in the sense of you're reading this like, oh yeah, he had a whole idea about Rand being a beggar, like literally, like going out in the countryside and becoming a beggar. It ends up in the show. I mean, in the books, but in a completely different way. In the sense of like you see visions, but it didn't turn out that way. So. Yeah, we didn't. I wasn't prepared for coming up with some funny ideas. Maybe if I see anything else, Seth, I'll bring them in. That's a great question. Some levity to the evening. Terez, were you going to say something?
I was going to say that his inability to spell wield was really funny.
God, there's many words. He's not a good speller.
Well, that was like the most persistent one that he just never learned how to spell.
Yeah.
Like power wielders. Yeah, he would always say stuff like that. But hey, Seth, appreciate your call, man, and hopefully you'll give us a call again, okay?
Yeah, till next time.
Till next time. So one of the things I hadn't brought up here, I posted this one, I think, to Instagram. I had asked everybody, who was Lanfear? According to the notes at this point in the books, who was she basically at least as strong as? And so for those of you that are watching, at some point in these notes after the Great Hunt, Robert Jordan did write down that he thought that Lanfear was at least as strong in the one power as a Shamael, and then almost possibly as strong as Lews Therin. So he had separated. He had given Lews Therin Telamon. He'd made him stronger than a Shamael, and had made Lanfear. And that's not how the charts turn out later on. No. But that does seem like it makes sense. She's definitely one of the people that he talks about a lot in the notes as compared to other Forsaken, and definitely thought of her as that strong. I don't know what made the change. I don't know why he eventually did not have her that way, but
there are definitely hints of that remain in the early books, that maybe he considered her to be as strong as the Shamael.
Yeah, I think.
He also, though, by that meant that Ishamael was not as strong as Lews Therin, which obviously that changed markedly because he really developed his idea of balance, and the dark and the light being balanced in power as well as So that was interesting too. So those two things changed.
Yeah, for sure. Now I see a couple more questions, and then we'll kind of finish up with final notes here. MK asked in chat, was there anything that you saw about the Tinkers in the notes, early on at least?
Well, these notes have Aaron's motivation for leaving the Tinkers and becoming one of the Lost. So that's mentioned, that he uses his interest in Egwene as as an
An
excuse.
excuse.
Yeah.
Yeah. I liked it. I liked seeing that very explicitly, that
Yes.
it was just an excuse for him to get out. Yeah, that was yeah. But I think it is just talks about Aram, right? It doesn't.
That's right.
But again,
I
one of
looked-
the characters gets mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Else Grinwell gets mentioned in this file,
Yes.
and he says something like, "She's doing a poor job at being a novice." Like that's what he wrote, which I thought was such a great line. Just so
Yeah.
funny.
I looked and looked
sorry, go
and
ahead.
looked for something to explain that scene in Lord of Chaos in the notes, and I never found anything. The Tinker Caravan that got murdered and
Oh,
they
yes,
left a
yes.
message. Yeah.
Oh, I wonder if that is the Loial plot line, because it
Probably
talks
the
about
way-
Loial.
way.
It talks about Loial bringing word and warning and traveling through the ways after the Ogier are killed. I wonder if that just became this like, okay, then I'm not going down that road, but I still want this in there. I wonder if that became
Yeah,
that one.
it could be. It's a random
related.
murder scene, so yeah, it's related in that way.
Yeah, right. The last question I see here, and we could probably go on for days about this stuff. What about Moraine's eyes and ears at the start of the book? More about them or her network? Did you see anything about
Nothing.
the eyes and ears? Yeah, I didn't see anything either. That seems like something he just, I don't know if invented in the moment. I don't know if you would say that, but yeah, nothing in the file that I remember seeing about it. So, and then I did see this question from Zali. Where do you find the notes? So if fans want to go see some of these notes, Terez, where can fans find the notes and maybe get access to it?
At the College of Charleston, Addlestone Library Special Collections. You don't have to make a reservation or anything. You just show up to Addlestone Library and go to Special Collections and ask to see Jim Rigney's notes.
And I think you have to leave your phone outside. You can take a pencil and paper in or something like that. I don't know what the
it's
current.
fairly-
I don't remember the exact rules, but they'll
give
advise
you the
you of all that
restrictions.
when you
Yeah.
get there. Yeah.
But we
and
did,
you could-
Teresa. You remember we did have to leave our phones
Did we?
off. Yes, we did.
Okay. I don't remember, but
Yeah,
Linda-
but
Linda
whatever the rules
remembers.
Whatever the rules are, then
Yeah, I mean
so-
they do change.
Yeah, right. So that's, by the way, thank you both for coming and doing this. This is a lot of fun. We've done this at JordanCon. For those of you that are watching, ever been to JordanCon, you should go next year. Hopefully we're able to go then. But we do this panel. Terez has always run one of these. I've missed a couple for years, but this is a lot of fun to kind of break out the notes and try to give you some answers and just kind of dig through them and understand kind of what Robert Jordan was thinking when he wrote these. So I appreciate all of you that were watching. Like I said, we'll do a series of these. I'll have these wonderful people back on with me, and we'll cover the Great Hunt, the Eye of the World. That's some of the crazier, fun stuff that we've actually covered at JordanCon before. And there are other things in the notes that are really interesting that do talk about cultures and dig in. I think the Shanshan have a huge file that just, I think a lot of that's included in, I want to say the Big White Book, as we call it.
You should take requests for topics that we can cover.
Yeah,
that's a great idea. That's a great idea. So on Twitter, on Facebook, or on Instagram, wherever you find us from a social media standpoint, feel free to send us some requests. What would you like to see an episode about? Also, we do have a Discord channel. You can find the links to all these in the description. We actually go into Discord afterwards. We end up chatting with other fans afterwards. So it's a little after show. If you have a question, you could leave it there in one of the channels. But yeah, just find us. We'd love to find out what it is you liked about this episode, didn't like, what do you want to see us to do more of. And we're happy to come back and have these conversations with you. This was a lot of fun. So Linda and Terez, it's awesome to see your faces. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's good.
Yeah, this was
meeting you.
Thank you.
What did you say? Yeah,
Thanks
happy
for
to
inviting me.
Absolutely,
Yeah, thanks.
absolutely.
Thanks for
How would I
having
not?
us.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And for those of you that are watching, really appreciate it. If you can like the video, like I said, subscribe. We really appreciate it. Would love to have you as one of our viewers. And as we say around here, good night from the Dusty Wheel and smash to black.
If you want news and